Alright guys, so today we're finally talking about Overwatch 2. Now, first I want to address, I haven't posted in a while. A video idea fell through for one video, and then this took me about 4 days to get into. If you don't know about the infamous queue for Overwatch 2, we'll talk about it in a minute. So Overwatch 2 isn't technically a new release, right? Well, technically it's a new game, it's under a new title, and you could classify it as a sequel. Realistically, it's an update. But somehow, if you don't know, Overwatch 2 came out roughly 4 days ago. It's free to play, and again, it's not really a sequel. It takes all of the maps, all of the game modes, all of the characters from the original game, adds a couple, improves the graphics the tiniest bit, really nothing noticeable, and re-releases it in that free format with promises of updates later on. My problem with this is exactly what I thought the problem was going to be, and I don't think I've even addressed Overwatch on this channel ever. I don't think I reviewed the original game, and so let me start there. I technically never owned Overwatch, the original. It went free to play through Games with Gold on Xbox, and I had approximately 10 hours in it from those free weekends, so I understood how the game worked. I had a fair share of familiarity with the characters and the different class types and all of that stuff, and so when I played here, enough was familiar to where I didn't really have to relearn everything. I just got right in, tried all the old characters, the new ones, and so on. And so my problem here is, like I said, exactly what I thought it would be. If you took Overwatch 2 and Overwatch 1 gameplay and put them side by side, I wouldn't know the difference. And you know why I say that? Because this whole time, the whole minute and 50 seconds this video's been playing, you've been watching Overwatch 1 gameplay. This is Overwatch 2 gameplay. Again, can't tell the difference. I've been saying this ever since they announced this and announced what it was going to be. I've said this jokingly about the Horizon Zero Dawn remaster that they want to do. If you're not going to drastically change the game, don't bother remaking it or making a sequel. The only way, in my opinion, this really would have worked is if they hadn't released any characters from launch, and this was an update where they added more characters. Now, that would have greatly hurt the original Overwatch. I'm not saying that's the route they should have taken, but that's the only way where a sequel with the same maps and the same characters and the same mechanics and same UI and the same interface and relatively the same graphics as a sequel works. So when I talk about Overwatch, I really don't have much to say about Overwatch 2. It does everything that Overwatch 1 does, it just looks slightly better with a few more characters. Now, again, I haven't addressed Overwatch 1 on this channel, so let's talk about that a bit. I think Overwatch weirdly falls into that same trap that a lot of games do, that people say it's repetitive and it's just like a copycat, and there's so many other games like it. If you really break it down to the time that this original game released, you have Rainbow Six Siege, Overwatch, and Valorant. In my opinion, those are the big three. The big three, and yes, Valorant is a kind of a ripoff of CSGO, but it does enough to where I warrant it as its own thing. But these are the big team-based shooters that pretty much every ripoff copies from for the rest of the time, right? All of these games are roughly about 5 to 7 years old, and they all incorporate some kind of team-based 5 or 6 person hero-based shooter aspects, whether it's more of that CSGO type feel or the Rainbow Six Siege or Overwatch. Pretty much every copycat, every big AAA copycat, and even the small ones too, tend to rip off some aspects or even some characters just like point for point straight from these 3 games. So why am I bringing this up? Why is it relevant for Overwatch 2? When you look at games that are a bit older, and not that these games are relatively that old compared to some others, but for example, like The Witcher 3 that I've talked about. Everyone says The Witcher 3 is, it won Game of the Year, it's groundbreaking, it's one of the best games ever. And if you look at it, when it released in 2015, it was. But looking at it now, 7, almost 8 years later, a lot of the stuff that game has problems with, the few negatives of that game, were copied by other games because the game was so good, and you've seen it so many times, and it's so repetitive. And you've seen that flaw fixed now because it's been so long, and so you just think it's just another game with that same flaw that so many other games have, but you have to think that was the first iteration of it. So that's how I feel with Overwatch and Rainbow Six Siege and Valorant. These were the originals, right? They did it first, But then all these other games came and did the same exact thing, but slightly worse, or changed it the tiniest bit, and so we got tired of the trope over and over and over again. I'd be saying the same exact thing if they released a Valorant 2. I mean, there's a million clones of Valorant and CSGO out there. If they released a Rainbow Six Siege 2 or Rainbow Six Siege 7, where they did the same thing Overwatch 2 is doing right now, basically upgraded the graphics, added a few new characters, I'd say the same thing. It doesn't do enough new to justify playing this. There's no reason to play this over Overwatch 1 other than the fact that Overwatch 1, the servers are down. So I'm saying all these negative things. Now, do I think Overwatch is a bad game? Absolutely not. It takes what I feel is the more casual setting of the 5v5 hero-based shooter and really does the best you can do with it, right? CSGO and Valorant have that certain style to it, right? If you know what I'm talking about, that hip fire type, one-shot, headshot, competitive type style. And then Rainbow Six Siege has the tactical attack and defense with operators and hero-based shooter mechanics. And then Overwatch is kind of the casual setting in the middle, right? Now, I'm not saying that Overwatch is casual, because it's definitely not. It has one of the most watched competitive player bases out there, but just from mechanically and from how the game is set up, it's not as tactical, I guess is the word I'm looking for, when compared to these other games that we've talked about in this video. My point being that Overwatch does what it does well, and it doesn't need to change. It takes the best things in its market and maximizes on it, right? It's the reason it's the top of this subgenre of game. Now, that's the positive I have to say. Again, the negative, this didn't need to be a new game. The only reason this is a new game is to build hype for essentially a new update. The only other thing I'll touch on is the fact that I haven't played both Overwatch and Rainbow Six Siege in a very long time until recently. And going back to both of these games, both of them do an incredibly good job at balance, right? Nobody in Overwatch feels too incredibly overpowered, and the same thing goes for Rainbow Six Siege. These games that did it originally are still doing it, and so that just begs the question, do you do what Overwatch does and release a new game, using that to build hype for your new update, to continue the brand and keep building Overwatch? Or do you go ahead and follow the path of Rainbow Six Siege, where they're on, what, year 7, about to be on year 8, and I honestly don't hear that much about it anymore. So let me talk about a score for this game. And so, the way I'm going to break this down is the way I try to break down Game Pass games. If you haven't watched one of my reviews before, when I do a Game Pass game review, I count it as free. And I don't typically say this, but I give them 2 free points for the most part. Depending on the game, I might take those points away, and typically on games where it would matter, the 2 free points don't mean anything because they're bad enough. But here, that's where the score is gonna, in my opinion, look a bit high, right? So just following my rules, because it's free, it has to get 2 free points. But let's start with the original Overwatch. What would I give the original Overwatch? That sits at like an 8. It is very good. It did something that really wasn't around. Even if you count, like we've been talking about Rainbow Six Siege, it's different enough and unique enough to warrant being its own thing. Now, for Overwatch 2, immediately, like because of everything I've said, it's a sequel that isn't really a sequel and doesn't improve upon the original, other than slightly in graphics and adding a new character or two, which the entire point of a sequel, in my opinion, is to improve upon the original, so it really doesn't do much in that regard. That's going to drop that rating, that scale, way down. So originally, I was sitting in like the 4 ballpark range, right? That's where I was sitting originally, just somewhere around there. It would be average if there was something added here and it was still the same monotonous and tedious gameplay that you've been playing for the past 5 years, fine. But there's really nothing added here, and again, the fact that it's free will weigh in here in a minute. But I would say it's below average. At this point, you've played enough of this. I have no reason to play this. I've played enough of the original Overwatch. If you still play Overwatch, this isn't going to do anything for you that Overwatch 1 didn't do for you, right? And so that's where I was sitting. And then the game launched. And oh boy, if you had to sit through that, if you were someone who actually sat in the queues, I feel sorry for you. I sat in them for like 15 minutes. And I was like, yeah, the video can wait. Like, this isn't worth it. And so I didn't play the game for 4 days. And if this game costs money, this would drastically kill the score. I mean, massive points. So to make this as convoluted and complex as possible, I really have two scores here. There's a gameplay score, which realistically, given that the original Overwatch I said was an 8, this would sit at like a 7. It does the same thing, just years and years later, so you've seen it and played it before. That would sit at a 7. But because of like the marketing of the game and the launch of the game, and just how it was advertised as a new game, but then it really wasn't a new game, and there's no point to this, I'm giving it a 5. So whichever one of the scores you want to go with, you know, good for you, but I'm going to go with the 5 in my books, right? When I'm looking back on this game is a 5 out of 10. But that's what I think. You guys let me know what you think of Overwatch 2, who your favorite hero is, old or new, and I'll see you guys on the next one.